有时间的话，请你来参加。OK，好，哎。
Looking back, what do you think the movement could have done differently at 1989 to be more successful or less people injured or died?
Yeah, we always think about that. Of course, history does not. There's no room for rewind there, but I always think about where I could have some impact in changing the direction. And personally, I just reflect on this every year, and every year I have new discoveries. For example, only this year I realized, to me, I was the first one to protest on Tiananmen Square, probably among the first one. The first day I was there, and it's the last day. I was pretty much, probably literally the last one to leave.
Was the first day on May 13th?
No, April 16th.
April 16th.
April 16th.
Oh my God.
So this was immediately the day after Huyaobang died. He died in the morning of April 15. The news came out on April 15, and I was probably the first group, among the first group, to offer a flower wreath for him at the center of Tiananmen Square, what's called the monument for the people's heroes. So I was the first one there. I was also the last one to leave. But in between, there were a lot of times where I was at the center and then I left. Then I came back for different reasons. After the massacre, I was number 5 on the most wanted list. It's like a government officialized. This is what we believe are the most important figures. To me, of course, that's an honor. That's also a beginning to take up this burden, this duty as a speak person.
What was your message to the government? Like let's say in one sentence, like what do you guys want from them?
We want direct dialogue, and we want them to recognize the students as recognize our activities as legal, not criminal. So after Deng's editorial, which basically is a verdict on the students, that says this is a right, and it's counter, what do they call, counter-revolutionary at that time. That's basically like sedition here, carries very severe punishment. In China, this basically means that's it. That's like the final word. And we were protesting later, just trying to change that. That's the main cause. But of course, we have lots of demand. For example, we have a petition of 7 demands, and the 2 most important ones among these 7. First one is the freedom of the press. Basically allow people to have a voice, not only in private, but in public space, to have their own newspaper. For example, the other one is ask the government to declare the assets of the top government officials as a way to fight corruption. So these 2 are the most important demands in 1989. So for a lot of Chinese people, they remember this as a patriotic anti-corruption campaign by the students. But of course, for us, we knew at that time, from the beginning, we knew we were fighting for freedom. but we were not trying to overthrow the communist government before the massacre. We were trying to push for the government to allow changes to happen. So that's.
So what are the other people? So you have main 3 universities in Beijing join this movement. What about civilians? Like, are you also recruit them, or they just come to help you?
They were there actually very early, as early as April 20th. And for example, today at Clubhouse, this Li Lanju, she was a student from Hong Kong, and they were there on Tiananmen Square on April 22nd, the day of Hu Yaobang's memorial, and we know now that there are also students from Tianjin who was there. So you see how diverse it was even from very beginning. But of course, if at first time the general public became engaged into this because they were enraged by Deng Xiaoping's editorial on April 26. Most people were trying to protect the students. So when the students were pouring out of the college campuses, because Deng said he wouldn't hesitate to kill, and so most people were so concerned, they were just crowding out the streets and isolating the police to such degree. All the police force and on that day were just useless.
What's so significant of Hu Yaobang's death caused you students to go on to the
This,
movement?
yeah, I think this situation is very similar to the opera and the movie.
Les Miserables.
Yeah, very similar. This general who was much admired by the
French Revolution.
by the populace. He died. People see this as just a call or a trigger for rebellion. It's very similar because in 1989, when he died, we look back, just people think he was removed because he was sympathetic to the students, and there were lots of pushbacks to the so-called reforms proposed by Hu Yaobang, and Deng Xiaoping actually started what we call the anti-capitalist freedom kind of act. He has a lot of things just trying to push back on that. So of course we just see this as.
Yeah. So I have another personal question for you. When you were in Tiananmen Square, did you ever have any way of contacting your family in your hometown, like your mother? Like, how does she feel?
Yeah, that's a very good question. After the first wave of protests, I actually resigned from the student organization because after Deng Xiaoping's editorial, I believe he was looking for blood, and I decided that we shouldn't go on because he was just beyond reason, and we shouldn't mobilize students anymore. Even though I participate in the demonstration on April 27th as a protest against his editorial. This protest actually came out very, I would say, subdued because of the editorial, but it slowly kind of evolved into a triumph of people. In later part, it was like a festival. Beijing people were giving food, drinks. They were throwing Coca-Cola. At that time it's considered some luxurious stuff for the students. So it ended in a triumph. So at that time I resigned. I said maybe this will end in a victory, and I don't have to push as hard. So I went back to pursue my study outside of China, so to go to United States to study. And I went back to my hometown, and they were all very happy. Of course, they were concerned of my activities earlier, but they were also relieved that I was trying to study to go to United States, even though they were kind of also dubious because my motivation for going out of China. But anyway, so that was in early May. But when the hunger strike broke out,
which is?
This was on May 13th. I was against this idea of hunger strike. But when hundreds of students were there on the square, it was cold, and they wouldn't eat anything. It was very difficult just to be passive. So I organized the students to send them coats because it was so cold, and we have to give them like medical supply, all that. So quickly, I went there on Tiananmen Square, and I started this broadcasting station at the very center of Tiananmen Square. We call it the movement, the voice of the students' movement on Tiananmen Square, and that quickly became the commanding center of the whole protests, because we were able to cover the whole area of Tiananmen Square, which is huge, with very strong voice, and also partly due to the technical capabilities of my the students of Tsinghua. We were able to put like dozens of the loudspeakers, amplifiers on the monument, just layers up there. It was like a technical miracle even. And so in that, I think we were able to supply the students, the hunger strikers. I think at the peak about 3,000 students there on hunger strike, and I think one probably died earlier, but we didn't know on the first day, on the second, but after that, most people were, so there was no deaths, and we were able to keep the ambulance coming very freely, even though millions of people, it could be going in and out. It was chaotic. It was very dynamic, but at the same time there was like a self-organized order there, because people see hope in this whole event of getting together. And
so the point of protest and then going into this hunger strike, so does the Chinese government did anything when you start a hunger strike?
No, of course, I think the dilemma for the government, the conundrum they were in, that Deng Xiaoping, he was the top leader, but Zhao Ziyang, he was a reformer, and Li Peng, who was hardliner. None of them had the real power to make the decision. I think that's why it ended in such a tragedy, because there were people, for example, from Zhao Ziyang's side, there were government officials trying to arrange some dialogue, and eventually there was a talk between Li Peng and the students, but nobody within the government was able to put even into question of whether Deng's editorial could be overturned. That's beyond the discussion, but for the students, that's our top demand. So that was always, that's something that two sides could never meet. And there were talks of that, but there were just...
So it was not very organized, chaotic. Even the government is kind of, they have different messages.
No, I think, no, because Deng Xiaoping made the decision from very early. Nobody could change it. So that's where the main, the main strut of the difficulty is. So Zhao Ziyang, who was trying to be conciliatory, was removed quickly because of that, because Deng considered him a traitor, even though he was officially the leader of the Communist Party. Deng, who was just leading the military, basically removed him, making a coup, basically.
So another question is sort of not, like, I'm just curious about, like, Deng at 1976 when Mao died and he started to open up the country. He did so many great things for China, and considered, like, like black cat is good, white cat, no, white cat is...
No matter which color, as
yeah,
long as you can catch it right.
Mouse.
Yeah.
So it seems like he was so 前卫, so progressive. What happened? Is he never really a progressive guy? Was he faking it?
No, he was at best programmatic, but he was also ruthless, cold, calculating. Unfortunately, he was very successful in 1989. Basically, he was trying to keep his own power at any cost, and he in doing this, he put the life of millions, thousands of people, basically in danger, and in the process killed.
Yeah. So do anybody know, I know it's a good it's a difficult question, it's difficult to answer. Do we approximately know how many people injured and how many people died, approximately?
We don't know. I think there are between hundreds and thousands. So the best estimate for now is probably between like 1,000 to 3,000. I personally saw about 40 people, 40 bodies in one hospital that's called Fuxing Hospital. But this was not the total number. This was just the bodies that they put in the bicycle garage outside of the hospital. That means the hospital was overcrowded with people who were injured or dying, and they had to put these dead people who they couldn't save there. So that's what I saw in one place. I believe we probably would never know the true number because simply they have kept this secret too long, for 32 years. And even people who died, their family, so afraid to talk about because it's such a forbidden topic, such a tragedy.
Yeah.
To even think about it, so these people have to disappear even from people's memory. Otherwise, it's just such a cause of trauma.
Yeah, so it's like in this country, if you go to war or if you go to any situation, if people died, there's a forensic evidence and people try to find the family of the person who died. It doesn't matter whether it's a crime or is a accident or is a natural cause, right? There's like people try to be more accurate about these data to the family. Yeah.
Right.
So I guess in this case, because it's such a movement that families probably felt shame about even to, right?
No, I mean, it doesn't matter how they feel towards the people who died. It's that the fact that these people died during the massacre is a stigma. It's still today a stigma to most families. So they have to, even though even if they believe their loved ones were innocent, still the fact that they were killed associated with this massacre is a stigma. It's a political problem. So, and that could have ramifications for generations to come. So that's why most people would simply hide it just way behind there. I think, for example, I was approached by a woman called Li Ming Liu, I believe, and her brother died around that date, June 4, but she was so traumatized because of that. She was never able to talk about this, just simply because the possibility. She didn't know where her brother went. But he simply disappeared from her life, and of course, years later, she still believed he was killed, but she never saw his body. But because he left her home in a quarrel with her husband, for some different reason, and never came back. But simply because he could have been killed by the martial law troops, and with that carried basically this crime, the stigma of crime as a rioter, that she just kept this as a secret for many years. And she came to me, I think this was like more than 10 years ago. This also still like 20 years after the massacre. She was able to express her sorrow, but we just don't really know, if she is courageous even today, because she can talk about. She wants to talk, even just simply talk about someone who died during this is a problem for people even here in the United States. So we probably will never know, and she is exception.
I want to know, when you were in the movement, whether you sit in the Tiananmen Square or later on you went back to give them food or having this radio station, were you in like a really high state? Like, what were you thinking? Were you afraid, or were you just wanted to be like helpful, or you have this like leadership inside of you? Tell me a little bit more about what was your state?
I don't really see myself as a leader there. I was trying to serve the need of the moment. That's how I saw myself there. that because it was such a dynamic movement, that there was just so much happening and so many people together, strangers, we could come together and work together in such a speed that we were able to do lots of amazing things. I don't think it could be attributed to anyone's leadership, but it was a wonder of human courage, ingenuity, and the ability to work with each other. So for a while, I think I always describe it as a festival of freedom. And yesterday, I think the speaker said it well. It's also an island of freedom. It's like a sanctuary of freedom. That meaning that once you step out of that this precious island, you feel the cold repression all around you, especially when you go out of Beijing. This go back to the question you were asking me, how my family felt. So as I was in the middle of this, one important thing we receive every day is that the post offices will carry letters and telegraphs, just thousands, tens of thousands of bags of letters coming to us, and it's just impossible to read them all. So I would encourage our people just to read through quickly and choose some good ones to read. And in the process, so one of the mailmen came to me. He said, you are receiving this every day. Have you ever thought you could send something to your family? So that I did. He gave me a postcard. I wrote, I said, I'm here on Tiananmen Square. It's just such a spirit of happiness and freedom here. And we don't have to be afraid of any dictatorship like that. And I sent this out. Of course, my family, upon receiving this, they were just shocked, scared, and they began to send me telegraphs for my mother being critical ill, trying to get me back to Xi'an. But I was on Tiananmen Square. They were sending this telegraph to my dormitories in Tsinghua University, so they didn't reach me until like 2 weeks later when I was back. But the moment I read it, I knew it was fake. I called them and just telling them I'm fine, just relax. All that. But that was the kind of that was the feel there. At that time, there were helicopters, the military helicopters. They were dropping not bombs, but leaflets, the government propaganda on Tiananmen Square and on the campuses of Beijing University, Tsinghua University, the top 2 universities of China, because they believe there was a rebellion. It's people just have this taste of freedom there, on the college campuses and on Tiananmen Square. They were afraid it could spread out of control, and of course it did spread to more than 400 cities in China, and even very small towns. There were reports of people's protest. I think that was, of course, a surprise to everyone, even people like me. We never realized that Chinese people could be so eager for political change, because this just we always try to keep it within our heart. We were never able to speak up, but all of a sudden, just voices coming out from the ground, like everywhere, from the sky. That's the feel of Tiananmen Square. Even though it was like chaotic, there was no accident. You think about it, for all these days that the students were there, from May 13 to June, more than 20 days, 3 weeks, not even a traffic accident there. And during the whole process, the students were in control. Basically, there was no government.
Wait. Where do people eat and go to the bathroom and sleep? Well,
Yeah. So initially they were just sleeping on the square.
Yeah.
Later, there were tents, and the people would send them just coats cover. And slowly it gets better. There were makeshift restrooms around Tiananmen Square set up.
So they bought like a
volunteers.
portable bathroom?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
But of course it was very difficult. It was not easy.
Messy.
Yeah, it was messy, and I think looking back, I think we probably did better than during last 32 years with lots of other protests. I think this was like the most orderly one, probably just than anyone. The most peaceful, the most orderly one. I mean, to the degree, I think that's probably just too orderly in a way for a revolution. That's how we see it. And so it's very radical in its idea, but it's very restrained. The students, for example, never try to take over for example, the parliament, the National People's Congress, whatever. They were just occupying the Tiananmen Square very peacefully. Even as the soldiers were killing the protesters, the students were trying to calm the situation. Like what you heard this morning, that's what happened. So
Where were you when they started to roll? Like, are you still in Tiananmen Square on June 3rd?
yeah, I was there.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about it. What did you see?
Yeah, actually before that I already left Tiananmen Square. I was in Tsinghua University for about a week before June 3rd, the evening of June 3rd. I realized this was the situation. It's getting really critical, very serious. I went to Tiananmen Square. I believe that was the most critical place to be. It turned out to be like the eye of the hurricane. A lot of killing happened around us, but we were kept safe by the courageous people who were just blocking the marching troops with their bodies. Basically, that's what happened. It felt like there's like a war going on from all directions. There were gunshots, there were armed vehicles charging around Tiananmen Square. There were military flyers going up from all different directions. It felt like a war, but we were there at the center, and we were just about a couple of thousands of peaceful protesters there, until later we were driven out of Tiananmen Square.